mayor posibilidad de desarrollar empresas ambientales. No empresas que tengan responsabilidad social y ambiental, sino empresas que en su modelo de negocio la variable ambiental es significativa. Ese es el programa New Ventures. Nos encontramos en China, India, Brasil, México, Indonesia y recientemente en Colombia. En Colombia el programa es apenas 2 años y tiene apenas 2 años, y a diferencia de México, México es el único país que tiene una organización propia, New Ventures, que han hecho un excelente trabajo, y aprovecho para felicitarlos y agradecerles por la invitación. A diferencia de México, en los otros países hay un socio local que hospeda el programa. El programa en Colombia está hospedado por la Universidad de los Andes, en la Facultad de Administración. Y pues yo estoy a cargo del programa y de los temas de emprendimiento. El año pasado, en este marco, digamos, académico, y por eso estoy acompañando aquí a Carol Tappenden, realizamos un estudio sobre el ecosistema de emprendimiento en Bogotá. Todos estos procesos de inversión, de impacto, de apoyo a los emprendedores, lo que está evidenciando es que efectivamente existen muchos actores que están participando, pero que de alguna manera, si no entendemos bien cómo operan esos actores, cómo participan, cuáles son las interrelaciones entre ellos y entre los emprendedores, el impacto de las inversiones cada vez va a ser menor. Entonces desarrollamos un estudio en Bogotá, para el caso de Bogotá, y encontramos cosas bien interesantes. Encontramos más de 300 organizaciones trabajando en emprendimiento en la ciudad, de las cuales solo se encuentran activas la mitad. Encontramos una amplia oferta de servicios de conocimiento y educación, pero una limitada oferta de servicios de financiación, particularmente de financiación innovadora, como es la que se requiere para la inversión de impacto, particularmente en temas de emprendimiento de subsistencia, autoempleo o de modelos de impacto social y ambiental. Y también encontramos cosas como que se requieren generaciones de marca ciudad alrededor del tema de impacto. Existen casos en el mundo, bueno, ustedes los conocen, Silicon Valley, pero evidenciamos temas en Brasil, en Chile, en Israel, en Singapur, en el mismo Colombia. Medellín es un ejemplo de emprendimiento de ecosistemas consistentes, los cuales pues deben consolidarse como marca para que la gente, cuando piense en una ciudad o en una región, no diga yo voy a buscar allá una oportunidad, sino voy a montar mi empresa. Y ahí hay una diferencia realmente significativa en el ecosistema. Estamos trabajando para una segunda fase. Esto se ha venido desarrollando con el distrito, con la alcaldía, y vamos a implementar unos modelos de trabajo colaborativos entre 3 tipos de organizaciones diferentes para apoyar a emprendedores. Otra cosa que evidenciamos, y aquí ya quiero introducir a Carol, es el tema de la falta de herramientas, la falta de plataformas, de soportes, de sistemas que permiten que esos ecosistemas de emprendimiento realmente se pasen de la virtualidad, digámoslo así, de simplemente un networking a un ecosistema como tal. No existen. En Latinoamérica realmente es muy limitado, pero dadas las características y la cantidad diferente de actividades que requiere el proceso el proceso emprendedor y los procesos de inversión de impacto, pues el desarrollo de estas herramientas se vuelve fundamental. Entonces le quiero dar la palabra a Carol Tappenden, Ella es una experta en todo el tema de fundraising, inversión social, ha trabajado más de 10 años en este tema. En los 2 últimos años fue la directora de una empresa que se llama CSR Systems, la cual estaba orientada a desarrollar infraestructuras y plataformas tecnológicas para este tipo de procesos, y recientemente pues es la directora de Nexi Global, quien tiene un enfoque mixto en el desarrollo de herramientas con los procesos de inversión social. Y pues para mí es un placer no solo estar con ustedes, sino también con Carol.
Thank you very much, Andrés. My apologies to everyone in the room for my handicap of needing to speak English. And if I speak too fast, wave your hand, do a jig, slow me down. I really hope we can keep the session quite interactive. I know we will have time to discuss at the end, but if you need me to clarify anything or you'd like to ask a question at any point in the middle of the presentation, please go ahead and do so. As Andrés mentioned, I've been working in the sector for 12 years and have kind of watched the evolution of what started out as social responsibility and social investment that became responsible investment, that we're now speaking the language of impact investment as the ecosystem has evolved and all the players in it have grown and matured over time. My own background is, as he said, we came out of South Africa. Have I got my presentation up, by the way? I can't see anything. Oh, there we go. It is, in fact, a map of South Africa, is it? And South Africa being a very unique example, and what an amazing environment to learn about this. As you know, I'm sure many of you know, we had apartheid in South Africa for a number of years up until 1994 when we had a democracy, and started to see the government wanting to redress the inequalities that we'd seen in terms of the allocation of obviously resources to the majority population, black people in South Africa. And it is in fact, it's been an incredibly exciting process to watch. It's meant that we've seen legislation for many of the corporates in South Africa, but also more and more legislation as it's coming into the investment space for companies and investors to make contributions towards socioeconomic development. So there is funding available, quite a lot of capital that has always been spoken about as social investment capital. And the reason being it's very confusing, and it was very confusing. Much of it was philanthropic. But it was confusing because it was a good thing that they were calling it social investment, because there was this intention of seeing a return. They actually wanted to use this capital to see a return. What it meant was, though, is that there were now investors and corporates who had all this money available that they needed to spend, and lots of social enterprises and NGOs who had no idea how to speak to each other, no idea how to measure the kind of impact that they were needing to make. And so it meant that there was an opportunity for us to provide support services and really start to understand who all the players are in the system. So over these last 12 years, as you can see, we've kind of been through, this is the evolution of our businesses, but literally starting out as Greater Capital Consulting, where we were consulting to corporates on strategy and to NGOs and social enterprises on strategy, to the point where we set up SASIX in 2006, which is the South African Social Investment Exchange. This was us really beginning to understand the need to bring together all the players in the system, as we were offline at the time, mapping all the players, trying to create some kind of market infrastructure for what was at the time social investment or corporate philanthropy, but has since then evolved into more kind of social stock impact investment, and looking at financial returns as well as far as the capital is concerned. How's everyone doing? Am I speaking too fast? All good? Good. Yes. So essentially, we set up SASIX. We then started looking at doing mapping in South Africa. We set up an impact investing network as well that grew out of that, and slowly have expanded more into the global space over time. What was very interesting for us as we started formalizing the infrastructure needs within South Africa was the enormous interest from all over the world. It was unbelievable. Within a week or 2 weeks of launching SASIX in 2006, these were hits on our website from literally all over the world. We started getting telephone calls from investors, from stock exchanges, from NGOs, from social enterprises saying, this is what we need. Someone needs to help us understand what's happening, what is the ecosystem, what's the infrastructure, what needs are there around intermediation, and how do we formalize what exists as a marketplace. I have no idea what is on there now. Can someone tell me what it is? Oh, it's a picture of Nexi. So the idea behind Nexi is really we've seen our role as it's grown over time, particularly since we launched Sussex in 2006, has been around how can we play a coordinating role? How can we facilitate and understand what's happening in what we've divided into 3 segments of the market space? Social enterprises, intermediaries who are looking for information, social enterprises looking for capital, and the investors who are obviously looking for placement of that capital and ways to kind of measure the change. So that's Nexi's mission, is to organize, improve, and grow the social capital market space. And there's much fragmentation in the market today. As I said, we've definitely identified that there are a lot of initiatives out there, but there is a need to organize the way they work. And so our role, again, is to look at supply and demand and to try and set up some market infrastructure in the center of that to provide the right kind of support around the ecosystem. What will it take to actually get there? And it's no mean feat. I mean, we're talking about a massive ecosystem here. There's lots of initiatives out there. I'm actually going to stand up so I can see the presentation because I'm struggling with not seeing what I'm talking about. Does that work for you? So essentially, what will it take? You know, we're aware that there are initiatives everywhere, and I realize that this is nowhere near representative of the entire world, but it is at least going to give you some indication of what's happening, most especially in the US, but also in Europe. There are amazing social enterprises out there. People keep talking about there's no pipeline. Well, there is in fact pipeline, but the reason you think there's no pipeline is because where do you go? How do you find out? What kind of due diligence? There are lots of networking organizations. There are metric organizations. We're seeing the financial services sector coming into the space and setting up their own departments. But how do you know any of this unless someone's recording this and starting to understand what's happening? And so for us, aside from just going out and doing a bunch of research, we're aware also of the need to take a developmental approach in how we go about doing this mapping. So it's not just doing desk research and mapping, it's going out, identifying the right kind of players in particular regions who understand the context, and obviously also the other bodies that are doing the mapping themselves. And so where have we done mapping, and what are we mapping, and what does that look like? We've obviously done it in South Africa, where we spent, I think it was 9 months to a year working on a body of work in understanding the impact investing ecosystem there. The work is underway in Europe now as well, being driven out of France initially and then moving further abroad. And then obviously planned for Latin America, hopefully working with strategic partners here to be able to do the same sort of thing. And so I thought it would be helpful to give you an example of, in South Africa, the mapping that we did there. And the original reason for our wanting to do it in South Africa is, as we'd seen the ecosystem developing over time, firstly, it was important to map it to understand who was there and what role we could play in coordinating those relationships. But secondly, for us, we come to the understanding that it was time to actually establish some kind of formal infrastructure beyond just Sussex, which was there, but perhaps set up some kind of social stock exchange. Was it really time? Is the market ready? Is it mature enough in South Africa to be able to do that? And that was, of course, a good opportunity for us to understand much more about each of the individual actors and their thoughts about whether or not that was feasible, in addition to making our own assumptions based on what we understood about them. So the way we went about doing the research in South Africa, and really I've just given you a very basic snapshot. This research is available if you want to have a look at the whole story about what came out of it. But we initially, from a desk-based research perspective, identified just over 400 organizations, all from the different, sort of representing the different actors. So social enterprises, we spoke into financial consultants, we spoke into the NGO sector, intermediaries, pretty much anyone who had anything to do with the space to make sure it was sufficiently representative.